On today's World Insight, full steam ahead with the 4th China International Import Expo in Shanghai. Going bigger and better? 4th time's the charm? Here's our host, Tian Wei.
Hello and welcome to World Insight. I'm Tian Wei. The 4th China International Import Expo, known as CIIE, the world's largest import expo, is to take place in Shanghai starting from Friday. It's believed to be a way for companies from all over the world to get on the fast lane to China's huge market. The opening ceremony of CIIE was just being held. Let's find out the latest.
One of China's biggest trade shows has kicked off in Shanghai. Chinese President Xi Jinping got the ball rolling on Thursday.
Ancient Chinese observed, one can tell the inside of a thing by observing its outside and see the future development by reviewing the past. For any country or nation to thrive, it must follow the logic of history and develop in line with the trend of the times. As for China, we'll not change our resolve to open wider at a high standard, we'll not change our determination to share development opportunities with the rest of the world, and will not change our commitment to build an economic globalization that is more open, inclusive, balanced, and beneficial for all.
This is the 4th time Shanghai hosts the China International Import Expo. This year, the number of countries and companies at the expo will hit another record high. Being open and going green are the event's buzzwords this year. Nearly 3,000 businesses from 127 countries and regions are taking part in the expo's 4th iteration. They include countries which are a part of the China proposed Belt and Road Initiative, from the Middle East and Eastern Europe, and developing economies. They are mainly from 6 industries, including food and agricultural products, automobiles, and consumer goods. The number of top global companies and corporate giants at the expo is also higher. 58 countries and 3 international organizations are setting up special exhibitions. There's a new section for art and cultural products, with paintings and sculptures, including works by artists like Picasso and Monet. The vast import exhibition will be complemented by forums on climate change, the digital economy, and green financing. There will also be a forum on the 20th anniversary of China's accession to the World Trade Organization.
This year, a total of nearly 3,000 exhibitors from 127 countries and regions will participate, setting new records. With a total of about $73 billion in deals reached last year, can this year's expo do better? Let's ask our panelists. For more on China International Import Expo, we are joined in Brussels. Daniel Grohl, a member of the board of the Center for European Policy Studies. Good to see you, sir. In Shanghai, Miguel Garacci, a former Undersecretary of the Italian Ministry of Economic Development. Good to see you as well, Mr. Minister. In Shenzhen, Xiao Gang, Director of Institute of Policy and Practice of Shenzhen Finance Institute of Chinese University of Hong Kong. Also in Shanghai, we have Qian Jun, Executive Dean of the Fanhai International School of Finance with Fudan University. Gentlemen, what a pleasure to see the 4 of you all together on the same screen. What a pleasure. Professor Qian, you are based in Shanghai. That's where it is going to be held. Tell me more about the latest. How, as an economist, do you see Import Expo like this?
I think it's an important event. I guess the special meaning for this year is that it's a continuation of last year. And last year was the first time that because of the restrictions for traveling, a lot of these shows were online. And I guess people are more used to this kind of offline-online combination of a large event like this. Mm-hmm. So we do expect that the total volume in terms of signed contracts to be higher than last year.
Right.
This is also a very important event at a moment that clearly there's a lot of disorganization of supply chain around the globe. And we hope that this is temporary, but in the meantime, it's important to have a big event like this to show that on the one hand, China is still buying stuff all over the world. And okay. Two, we want to see that all the other countries continue to sell stuff to China. And hopefully this will help stabilize the global import-export system and trade and help boosting economic growth.
Undersecretary, Mr. Garachi, you frequented the CIIE. Now, to you, particularly this year, what does it mean?
It's very important to test if we manage to continue, and I do hope this is the case, to increase trade with a mix of online and offline deals. And this could be setting the stage for very important future development.
Mr. Guo, how do you read the gestures and signals, messages different countries, and including China through CIIE, trying to send?
Well, it is apparent that everybody now just wants to get out of the COVID recession. And most politicians also realize that one way to get out of it is by revitalizing international trade. And that has two aspects. One, as the colleague said, these supply chain disruptions, and they can be very well dealt with or better dealt with when people meet physically as they do at the fair in Shanghai. Actually, everybody loses if they start or continue a new trade restrictive measures. I think the Americans have learned that they really didn't gain anything from their trade war against China. So I think this helps to keep the system together and trade open to accelerate the recovery.
Professor Xiao Geng, also from your perspective.
Well, I think this year is particularly important in the sense that China tried very hard to not just export, but also trying to import in terms of green economy and a lot of other challenging issues. This is an opportunity to show China's policy of continue to import, not just export.
Mr. Guo, there were earlier reviews by the WTO about China's performance, which the Chinese Vice Minister of Commerce did not believe as appropriate, as some of the assessments were beyond the WTO umbrella. However, he did mention that China will look into those concerns that have been within the WTO range. So, Mr. Guo, how do you see this debate as a result of geopolitics, as a result of a bigger player like China rising economically, to the future nature of discussion that we're likely to see at the WTO?
Economically, the joining of China into the WTO has been a big success. It has been a big success, of course, for China. Everybody knows that. I believe, and most people would agree, it has also been a success for other countries, especially, if I may say so, in Europe, where the export opportunities to China have been taken up more strongly than the United States. I mean, Europe exports almost twice as much in manufacturing products to China than the US does. So in Europe, we see that there's also a big market there, which is good for our enterprises. What is the problem is that things which go beyond the mere tariff element of WTO, which have been reduced, what enterprises in Europe perceive is that there are still obstacles in so-called non-tariff barriers, which are sometimes very opaque. And sometimes they feel that some of their competitors in China get some advantages from the Chinese government, advantages which are difficult to grasp and to put a figure on. It's more a feeling than anything else. And that creates a lot of bad will here in Europe as well. My recipe would be to say, we have to sit together and bring these things out into the open, discuss not merely at the abstract geopolitical level, but discuss in detail. What is it that we, European enterprises, complain about? What is it that the Chinese side expects? And only if one gets down to these details, then I think one could find solutions which in the end will benefit both sides.
Communication seems to be a big problem these days. It's always been overshadowed by one thing or another sometimes. Mr. Guo.
That is, I think, less of a problem in Europe. There's some rhetoric related to non-trade issues, let me call it that way. But actually, trade on the ground is proceeding pretty well. And I think if the technical people meet and abstract from the geopolitical tensions up there, then I think one can make progress. But of course, both sides have to be willing to say, we disagree at one level, but here we have to do something practical together, and we should be able to do it even if there are other disagreements.
Professor Xiao, it seems that the first round of trade between China and U.S. When Trump was in power did not necessarily benefit the United States. And the Biden administration did not have quote-unquote better ideas, according to analysts, regarding China. So how do you see, the two sides are likely to continue their way of dealing with each other and therefore impacting on the trade between the two sides and others too?
Well, I think the U.S., the trade war with China actually disrupted the U.S. Supply chains, so that's causing quite serious inflation. So in a sense, the U.S. actually want to maybe stop those, tariff, but that's politically almost impossible, very, very difficult. So that's why I think the two countries needs to find a way to actually they are using disguised ways to reduce the tariffs. But I think China is going through very dramatic structure change by focusing on a common prosperity, improving the labor conditions, and also shifting to the green economy, and that's actually benefiting Europe and most other countries. And the U.S. is likely to lose big in the future if this route continues on trade. So I think China now is preparing for basically like a CCP, TPP, a lot of trade negotiations with other regions, and that I think eventually will improve the U.S. chance to go back to normal.
Okay, Professor Chen, we have seen China have been doing a lot of structural changes to a certain extent with the latest policies, whether it is regarding the tech sector or, the real estate tax and other things. How do you see the latest adjustments, different rounds, likely to impact the investors' confidence and understanding about the Chinese market, and therefore also on the nature of trade?
Very big commitment China has recently made was announced by President Xi in a meeting. He basically said China will stop funding or building any more coal power plants outside China. To me, that's a big commitment to the world. So that I would like to add that this is very important, because if China can commit to such a important strategy going forward, I do believe the disputes within the WTO realm of guidelines can be resolved. That's one. Two, the trade with the U.S., as Mr. Xiao said, it's not, nobody's winning. The other important stats, as shown by academics, including one of my colleagues, is that for every $1 tariff U.S. imposed on China, at least 90% of the tariff were eventually borne by U.S. customers and U.S. Factories that uses the Chinese exported goods as an input. So hopefully more and more politicians will understand that, you know, they can talk about a lot about geopolitics, but trade is something that in general, when it's well designed, it's good for all the countries. I think overall these structural changes are meant to have the current and future growth model to be more high quality rather than just more balanced, if you will, a more balanced growth model, a more inclusive growth model for more people. But one thing it's clear to me is that events like CIIE and China's commitment for a greener planet and for opening up to the outside world, again, as shown by the CIIE, will continue. And because the sheer size of the Chinese economy, the demand, the size of consumption will only continue to grow. Basically, there's a lot of opportunity, future opportunities for manufacturers, service providers around the globe.
We have been hearing some great news about RCEP likely to be effective early next year. It's maybe 6+4. We are likely to see ASEAN countries plus 5 countries, China, South Korea, Japan, Australia, and New Zealand, all working hard toward the ultimate goal. So to you, Professor Xiao, what does RCEP mean at the time when you see little good news about trade mechanism in the world today?
Well, RCEP is important in the sense that the center of global economy is shifting back to Asia, and RCEP, covers ASEAN, but also the major Asian economies like Japan and China. So if the U.S. and China trade issues were not resolved and the WTO is not moving forward, then regionally we're going to see some alternative, and that's going to put the pressures on the rest of the world, because China in this region is the major deficit. So all the other countries, particularly ASEANs, are benefiting tremendously from trade and in terms of employment, and China's consumptions will continue to increase. So that's a engine of growth for this region.
Under Secretary Garachi?
I think the RCEP proves a few things. One is, like my old professor of economics, Don Bush, used to tell me, Michele, when you want to learn economy, you have to look at the geography. And that's what I tell my students too. 15 countries, they looked at the map, they remember where they are, and they decided that trade happens within neighbors. That's also the gravity model that we use in economics. They also looked maybe at what the prospects of growth are in, let's say, Europe, in the West, and in Asia. And that makes sense to join forces. They also looked, I may say, at the success of the European Union to have a free internal market with a custom union. Notwithstanding our issues, the European Union works as a common market. The ASEAN uses a different model, rule of origin, works too. And so all these components make the other 5 members of the Asian region to join forces and make this great group of 15 countries that represent 30% of the world, that will probably by themselves will not need so much of import and export from any other parts of the world, because little by little, the decoupling is already happening, happen in what are at least the goods the country needs to continue to be independent. China, the dual circulation, tell us that China will continue to do trade, and a lot of trade, import and export, but it will not rely on export as growth. And I think these 15 countries will be like this. Thailand will, of course, continue to export rice. China will need to import raw material. But fundamentally, these are economies that could live relatively in a resilient world without too much, and they will maybe shelter from external shocks. But the geography is the key point, especially, if I may, countries like New Zealand, Australia, Japan, and Korea, they've traditionally have looked at the other side of the world for partnerships.
RCEP is relatively a basic trade arrangement. However, we will see 30,000 types of goods among ASEAN economies. Once it is coming into effective, RCEP will be zero tariff, and the other goods among them will be tariffs zeroing out within 10 to 20 years. That is a basic mechanism, but still, what kind of good pressure will it send to WTO ministerial meeting? What kind of good pressure will it send to CPTPP, in terms of being inclusive and welcoming new members to join? Mr. Guo, tell us more about that, and also particularly from the European perspective.
I think it is an important step, but it is not. It doesn't really deal with the key problems which we are facing right now at the global level, which are very often things which go beyond tariffs. Subsidies to state-owned enterprises, for example, and other non-tariff barriers which hinder trade. So the signal which RCEP sends is, in a sense, a positive one. We are going at least in the direction of eliminating tariffs. It also sends a slightly negative message in a sense that, but this group of countries which are close together, as Michele said, they have not been able to go beyond tariff elimination. They have not been able to integrate their markets in different ways. That is partially understandable because they have a very different economic structure. But these are the key issues which we are facing now at the WTO level. Namely, not just going beyond tariffs, but what do you do with subsidies? And very importantly, how do you enforce rulings by the WTO's arbitration panels? Because in every agreement you have disagreements. So you have to have a mechanism to resolve the disagreements. And then the key question is, in the end, will it then be just the strong who dominate? Or is there a sort of court like the WTO had until recently, which can say whether you're weak or you're strong? Here, before this court, everybody's equal, and in the end, even the strong accept if a ruling goes against them.
Right.
That is the key issue now at the WTO level. RCEP, unfortunately, gives a small positive signal, but not really one which impinges on this key issue.
It's very crucial what you have just said. A series of questions concerning the WTO appellate body. Of course, it's been collapsing because the judges have not been approved by some of the countries of WTO, and therefore there's no way it is coming out with new rulings. But anyway, Professor Xiao, you want to respond to that?
Yeah, I think the first best, of course, is WTO. But when WTO is not, going well, then it's like gravity. The countries in the RCEP, basically they are so close together and they are weighting. Economic weighting is increasing. So I think this is something which will send pressures to WTO. If WTO cannot resolve all those dispute resolution issues, then something second best is going to emerge, which is not good for everyone. But because this group of countries, their economic weight is so big and is rising, so I think that's basically the message. We have to do something to get the first best.
Professor Chen?
I view RCEP as an outcome because WTO has met so many difficulties. The judges cannot be approved. Some of the dispute resolution mechanisms were on hold. And that gave rise to these regional partnerships. It just happened that RCEP is probably the largest regional partnerships because of gravity, because of similarities among the economies, among the people. So in some sense, I think you can argue that if the problems with WTOs are not resolved in the coming years, maybe you will see RCEP pushing forward, going beyond eliminating tariffs. Because I think as long as this is functioning, all involved countries will feel the benefit of pushing forward of more cooperation beyond tariffs. So, so in that sense, I think it's a good push to resolve some of these disputes. And obviously, as I said, China is also trying very hard to work on a comprehensive agreement with Europe. We hope that will continue. And then between China and the US, perhaps that's the most difficult one, the most important but most difficult bilateral relationships. As we discussed before, if more and more US politicians, I think the economists and trade people all understand, but if more US politicians understand that without trade, it's going to hurt everyone, maybe there will be some progress in that.
When Mr. Chen was talking about China, Europe, Mr. Guo was putting on his glasses and taking it off very quickly. Obviously, Mr. Guo, you want to say something about that?
Yeah, this comprehensive agreement is actually more about investment, less about trade. And an interesting aspect is that the little it contains about trade would actually be MFN basis. So China would extend the benefit to everybody. So implementing this comprehensive agreement between the EU and China would actually benefit everybody in the world as well a little bit. So that makes it even more imperative that the geopolitical issues are being resolved so that that agreement can move ahead.
All right. We're running out of time for discussion, but for now, I want to thank the four of you for joining us. Daniel Guo, Miguel Galachi, Xiao Geng, and Chen Jun. Really appreciate it, gentlemen. Thank you. And of course, my team and I will be in Shanghai for the CIIE. We're going to bring you more news and discussions from there. That's all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more, search World Insight or check out our YouTube channel. Follow us on Twitter and Facebook. I'm Tian Wei. On behalf of the team, thanks for watching. Bye for now.